Montana Territory, 1878. The sky stretched endless above the rolling prairie, painted in shades of amber and gold as the sun descended toward the jagged peaks of the distant mountains. The frontier was a place that swallowed men whole, chewed them up, and spat out whatever remained. At least that's what Reid Dawson believed. At 25, Reid had seen enough of the West to know its cruel nature. He'd buried friends in shallow graves, watched men kill each other over gold claims and cattle disputes, and survived 3 harsh winters that had frozen others in their tracks. The land was beautiful but merciless, and Reid had learned long ago that attachment was a luxury a cowboy couldn't afford. Love was a distraction that got men killed out here where only the hardened survived. His weather-beaten hat pulled low over deep blue eyes. Reid guided his chestnut mare across the open grassland toward the small settlement of Pine Creek. 5 years of driving cattle, breaking horses, and drifting from ranch to ranch had left him lean and strong, his shoulders broad beneath his worn denim jacket. Despite the hardships etched in the fine lines around his eyes, his face maintained a youthful handsomeness that he barely noticed and certainly didn't value. "Just supplies and maybe a hot meal, Penny," he told his horse, patting her neck. "Then it's back to the trail." The mare nickered softly in response as they crested a rise. Below them, Pine Creek sprawled alongside the winding water that gave it its name, a collection of wooden structures fighting for permanence against the vast wilderness. Reid had been careful never to stay too long in one place. Putting down roots meant vulnerability, and vulnerability was something he couldn't afford. His parents' farm in Missouri had taught him that lesson. They'd built something beautiful, only to watch it burn during the border wars. His mother had died in that fire, and his father had followed her to the grave a year later, a broken man whose heart had simply given out. At 18, Reid had headed west with nothing but his father's revolver and a promise to himself, never to build anything that could be taken away. Now, 7 years later, he drifted with the seasons, working cattle drives in summer, wintering at whatever ranch would hire a capable hand, and moving on before anyone got close enough to matter. He told himself it was freedom. Sometimes, in the quiet of night beneath star-filled skies, he almost believed it. As he rode into Pine Creek, the late afternoon bustle greeted him. Merchants closing shops, ranch hands gathering at the saloon, a freight wagon unloading supplies at the general store. Reid dismounted outside Finley's mercantile, tying Penny to the hitching post and dusting off his trail-worn clothes. "Be back soon, girl," he promised, unaware that his carefully constructed solitude was about to face its greatest challenge. The bell above the mercantile door jingled as Reid stepped inside, the familiar sense of coffee, leather, and dried goods filling his nostrils. A young woman stood behind the counter, her back turned as she arranged bolts of fabric on a shelf. Long honey-blonde hair cascaded down her back in a thick braid that reached her waist, catching the golden sunlight streaming through the window. "Be with you in just a moment," she called over her shoulder, her voice carrying a melodic quality that made Reid pause. "No hurry, ma'am," he replied, removing his hat. "Just need some supplies." When she turned, Reid found himself looking into eyes the color of summer sage, green with flecks of gold that seemed to capture the fading sunlight. Her face was heart-shaped, with high cheekbones and a smattering of freckles across a delicate nose. She couldn't have been more than 22, her youth still evident in the softness of her features despite the unmistakable weariness behind her smile. "What can I help you with today?" she asked, smoothing the front of her simple blue calico dress. Reid cleared his throat, suddenly aware he'd been staring. "Coffee, beans, flour, and some salt pork if you have it. Heading north tomorrow. Just passing through then?" She began gathering his requested items, moving with practiced efficiency. "Always am, ma'am." A small smile touched her lips. "I'm Violet James." "No need for ma'am. Makes me feel like my grandmother." "Reid Dawson," he offered, surprised at his own willingness to share even that small detail. As she measured coffee beans into a paper sack, a commotion erupted outside. Shouts and the sound of running boots preceded the mercantile door flying open. A young boy of perhaps 8 years burst in, his face flushed with exertion. "Miss Violet, it's Dr. Simmons. He says Grandpa's taken a turn, and you need to come quick." The color drained from Violet's face. She set down the coffee scoop with a shaking hand. "Tommy, Tell him I'll be right there. I just need to. She looked around the store helplessly, then back to Reid. Go, Reid said without hesitation. I can wait. She bit her lower lip. The store, I can't close early. Mr. Finley's away in Helena. And Hill, then I'll mind it till you return, Reid found himself saying, though he couldn't explain why. Not much to it, I reckon. Take money, give goods. Relief and surprise mingled in her expression. I couldn't ask, you didn't. I offered. He moved behind the counter, gently urging her toward the door. Go see to your grandfather. Gratitude shone in her eyes. Thank you, Mr. Dawson. I won't be long. She untied her apron, grabbed a shawl from a hook, and hurried out the door with the boy. Reid stood in the empty store, wondering what had possessed him to volunteer. It went against everything he believed about staying uninvolved, unattached. Yet something in her worried eyes had bypassed his usual caution. Temporary, he muttered to himself. Just temporary. 3 hours later, the sun had set and Reid had served a total of 5 customers, fumbling through transactions while trying to maintain the dignity of a man who knew what he was doing. He'd just finished lighting the store lamps when the door opened again, and Violet returned, her face drawn with exhaustion. My grandfather's stable for now, she said, removing her shawl. I can't thank you enough for. She paused, looking around the store in surprise. You organized the tobacco shelf. Reid shifted uncomfortably. Had some time. Noticed it was a mess. A genuine smile broke through her weariness. And swept the floor too, I see. He shrugged. Figured I might as well make myself useful. Mr. Dawson, you're a puzzle. She moved behind the counter, her skirts rustling. Most drifters wouldn't spare the time. Not most drifters, he said, then immediately regretted the implication that he might be different. Different meant memorable. Memorable meant attachments. Just didn't have anything better to do, he added gruffly. Well, you're nothing better to do save me today. She reached for a ledger. Now, let me finish your order. As she worked, Reid noticed the slight tremble in her hands, the shadows beneath her eyes. Your grandfather, he been ill long? Pain flickered across her features. Since winter. His lungs. Doctor says. She swallowed hard. Says he won't see another spring. Reid nodded, unsure what to say. Comfort wasn't his strong suit. I came to care for him 3 years ago, after my parents died of fever back east, she continued, measuring flour now. He's all I have left. The simple statement hung in the air between them, an unintentional echo of Reid's own situation. He found himself wanting to tell her about his parents, about the emptiness that followed loss, a desire so unexpected it left him momentarily wordless. I'm sorry, he finally managed. She tied the package with string, her movements precise despite her fatigue. Life out here isn't kind, is it? But we endure. We do, Reid agreed, paying for his supplies. As he gathered his purchases, their fingers brushed, and for a moment, their eyes met. Something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Will you be staying in town tonight? Violet asked, a faint color touching her cheeks. Plan to camp outside town, Reid said. There's a decent boarding house 2 doors down. Mrs. Holcomb keeps clean rooms. Reid hesitated, then nodded. Might be nice to sleep in a real bed for once. Good night then, Mr. Dawson. She smiled, a gentle curve of lips that seemed to brighten the entire store. And thank you again. As Reid stepped back into the night, pack heavy with supplies, he felt something shift inside him, a small crack in the wall he'd built around himself. It troubled him more than he cared to admit. Temporary, he reminded himself firmly, heading toward the boarding house instead of back to Penny and the trail. I'll be gone by morning. But morning came, and Reid found himself still in Pine Creek. A loose horseshoe had provided a convenient excuse to visit the blacksmith, and while waiting, he'd somehow agreed to help the livery owner mend a broken corral fence. One task led to another, and before he knew it, 3 days had passed. 3 days in which he'd found reasons to visit Finley's mercantile each afternoon. 3 days of learning that Violet had come west after finishing school in Pennsylvania, that she could recite Shakespeare from memory, that she had dreams of opening a small school in Pine Creek someday. 3 days of fighting the growing sense that leaving was becoming harder with each sunset. On the 4th day, as Reid repaired a leak in the mercantile's roof, another task he'd somehow volunteered for, disaster struck. A rider came pounding into town, his horse lathered and heaving. Fire. Wildfire coming from the south. Everyone out. The cry echoed through Pine Creek, sending people scrambling. Reid climbed down from the roof to find Violet standing in the street, her face pale as she looked toward her grandfather's small cabin at the edge of town. "Grandfather can't be moved," she whispered as Reid approached. "His lungs, the smoke would kill him." The southern sky had already darkened with billowing clouds of gray and black. The fire was moving fast, driven by the late summer winds across drought-parched grass. "How far to the creek?" Reid asked. "Quarter-mile behind the cabin." "If we can get him there, into the water." "Yes," she nodded frantically. "Yes, that might work." Reid whistled for Penny, who came trotting from the livery. "Gather what you need. Quickly." While the town erupted in panicked preparation, Reid and Violet rode double toward her grandfather's cabin. The old man was frail, his breathing labored even in the still clear air of his bedroom. "Violet, child," he wheezed, "you should be evacuating with the others." "We're going to the creek, Grandpa," she explained, gathering blankets. "Reid will help us." The old man's roomy eyes turned to Reid, assessing. "Young man, save my granddaughter. Don't risk yourself for an old-timer already halfway to the grave." "With respect, sir," Reid replied, preparing to lift him. "I didn't ride all this way to leave anyone behind." They wrapped the old man in blankets and Reid carried him outside, where the southern sky had turned ominously dark. The wind carried the acrid scent of smoke now, and in the distance, they could see the orange glow of approaching flames. "We need to hurry," Reid said, securing the old man on Penny's back. "Fire's moving faster than I thought." They set off toward the creek, Reid leading Penny while Violet kept her grandfather steady in the saddle. The terrain grew rougher as they left the beaten path, forcing them to move slower than Reid liked. The roar of the fire grew louder behind them, a hungry beast devouring everything in its path. When they finally reached the creek bank, the smoke had thickened considerably. The water flowed clear and cool, about waist-deep in the center. "We need to get in." Reid helped the old man down, then turned to Violet. "The fire will jump the creek, but we should be safe in the water." They waded in, supporting the elderly man between them. The water was shockingly cold despite the summer heat, but Reid knew it was their only protection now. Through the trees, they could see the advancing wall of flame, at least 30 feet high and moving with frightening speed. "Hold on to me," Reid told them both, finding a spot where a fallen tree created a small eddy in the current. "Keep your faces low to the water when the fire reaches us." As the inferno approached, Reid looked at Violet's face, fear mixed with determination, her honey-blonde hair darkened by water, her sage-green eyes reflecting the approaching flames. In that moment, surrounded by danger, he realized with startling clarity that he'd never seen anyone so beautiful. The thought terrified him more than the fire. The roar became deafening as the flames reached the creek bank. Reid pulled them lower into the water as searing heat washed over them. Sparks and burning debris rained down, hissing as they struck the water's surface. Violet clutched her grandfather with one hand and Reid with the other, her grip fierce with determination. For endless minutes, they endured the hellish onslaught. Reid kept them anchored against the current, his body a shield against the worst of the floating embers. When the main fire front had passed, leaving blackened earth and smoldering trees behind, they remained in the water until the heat diminished enough to breathe properly. "We made it," Violet whispered, her voice hoarse from smoke. Her grandfather's breathing was labored but steady. The old man managed a weak smile. Quite an adventure for an old-timer. Relief washed over Reid, stronger than any he'd felt in years. They were alive. She was alive. The realization carried a weight that shook him to his core. They returned to find Pine Creek largely spared. The fire had changed direction at the last moment, sweeping east of the settlement. A few outlying structures were lost, but the town center stood intact. The citizens greeted their return with amazement and gratitude. That evening, with her grandfather resting under the doctor's care, Violet found Reid outside the saloon, staring at the still smoldering horizon. "You're leaving, aren't you?" she asked quietly. Reid nodded, not trusting his voice immediately. "First light." She stepped closer, her nearness making his resolve waver. "Why?" "It's what I do," he said simply. "Never stay too long in one place." "Because of what happened to your family," she said, surprising him. At his questioning look, she added, "You mentioned them, during the fire, when we were waiting for it to pass." Reid frowned, trying to remember. The intense moments in the creek were a blur of fear, heat, and determination. "You said you wouldn't lose anyone else," Violet continued gently. "That you couldn't." Reid turned away, uncomfortable with being so transparent. "The fire made me forget myself. Or perhaps it helped you remember who you truly are." Her hand touched his arm lightly. "A man who carries others to safety. A man who keeps his word. A man who feels deeply, despite trying to convince himself otherwise." "Violet, I'm not asking you to stay," she interrupted. "I just want you to know that running doesn't heal what's broken inside. Trust me, I've tried." Her words struck him like physical blows, penetrating defenses built over years of careful isolation. "Some things can't be healed," he finally said. She studied him in the fading light, her expression soft with understanding. "Perhaps not, but they can be lived with, especially when you don't have to carry them alone." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Reid with thoughts more turbulent than the wildfire they'd escaped. Dawn found Reid at the livery, saddling Penny for departure. His supplies were packed, his decision made. Pine Creek wasn't for him. No place was. The trail was his only constant companion, and that was how it needed to stay. He led Penny out into the quiet street, the early morning mist still clinging to the boardwalks. At the edge of town, he mounted up, adjusting his hat against the rising sun. As he prepared to urge Penny forward, hoofbeats approached from behind. "Mr. Dawson." Reid turned to see Tommy, the boy from the mercantile, riding bareback on a pinto pony. "Miss Violet's grandfather took bad in the night," the boy gasped. "Doctor says it's the smoke. She sent me to find you." Reid hesitated, torn between the safety of departure and the pull of obligation. "The doctor's with him?" Tommy nodded. "Says there ain't much to do but wait. Miss Violet's all alone." The word struck Reid like a physical blow. All alone. Words that had described his own existence for 7 years. "Where is she?" he asked, already turning Penny around. "Cabin at the edge of town, by the blackened oak." Reid rode hard, arriving at the small cabin to find Violet on the porch, her face drawn with exhaustion and grief. When she saw him, surprise briefly replaced her worry. "Tommy found you," she said simply. "How is he?" She shook her head, tears threatening. "Doctor says the smoke was too much. His lungs were already weak. It's just a matter of time now." Reid dismounted, tying Penny to the rail. "I'm sorry. He's asking for you," she said, which surprised Reid even more. "He's been drifting in and out, but he keeps mentioning the young man who carried me." Inside the cabin's single bedroom, the old man lay propped against pillows, his breathing shallow and raspy. His eyes, clouded with pain, brightened slightly when Reid entered. "There he is," the old man wheezed. "Came to see me off, did you?" "Came because you asked," Reid said, standing awkwardly beside the bed. The old man gestured weakly for him to sit. "Not much time, so I'll be direct. My Violet. She'll be alone when I go." Reid nodded, unsure what to say. "Seen how she looks at you," the grandfather continued. "Seen how you look at her too, when you think nobody's watching." Heat rose in Reid's face. "Sir, no arguments. Dying man's privilege." A weak smile crossed his weathered face. "You're running from something. We all are out here. But sometimes, son, what you're running to is more important." He broke into a coughing fit then, and Violet rushed in with water. When the spasm passed, the old man looked exhausted but determined. "Promise me you'll look after her," he said to Reid. "Not forever, if that scares you. Just until she finds her feet." Before Reid could respond, the old man reached for his granddaughter's hand and placed it in Reid's, his own gnarled fingers closing around both of theirs. "Two lost souls," he murmured, "found each other in this wilderness." Violet's hand trembled in Reid's grasp, but she didn't pull away. Neither did he. Harrison James passed peacefully that evening, with his granddaughter at his side and Reid standing vigil at the door. The funeral was held the next day, the entire town turning out to pay respects to one of Pine Creek's original settlers. In the days that followed, Reid found himself unable to leave. He told himself it was the promise he'd made to a dying man, a temporary commitment to ensure Violet could manage alone. He helped repair the fire damage to her grandfather's property, chopped enough wood to last the coming winter, and performed countless small tasks around the cabin and the mercantile. 2 weeks stretched into a month, and still he stayed. October brought the first frost, painting the mountains with gold and crimson. Reid found work at the nearby Diamond Tea Ranch, riding out each morning and returning to town each evening, where he took his meals at the small table in Violet's kitchen. They developed a rhythm, a comfortable routine that should have terrified him, but somehow didn't. They talked in the evenings, about books she'd read, places he'd seen, dreams they'd once held. Gradually, Reid found himself telling her things he'd never shared with anyone, about his parents, about the farm in Missouri, about the hollow ache that had driven him west. One evening in late October, as they sat before the fire, Violet set aside her mending and looked at him directly. "You never left," she said softly. Reid stared into the flames. "Made a promise. To a man who's been gone a month now." She hesitated. "Reid, why are you really still here?" The question hung between them, demanding a truth Reid wasn't sure he was ready to acknowledge. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I should have gone weeks ago. But you didn't." "No." He met her gaze. "I didn't." Violet moved to sit beside him on the small sofa. "I'm glad," she whispered. The proximity of her, the scent of lavender in her hair, the warmth of her shoulder against his, broke something loose inside Reid. 7 years of carefully maintained distance crumbled in an instant. "Violet, he struggled for words. "The things I've told you about my past, about my parents. I've spent years running from those memories. From the pain." "I know," she said gently. "Staying in one place, caring about people, it always seemed too dangerous, too easy to lose everything again." She nodded, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "And now I'm terrified," he admitted, "but not of staying, of leaving." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "I don't know how to do this, Violet. How to build something when all I've known is how to walk away." "Perhaps," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "we learn together." In the gentle glow of the hearth, Reid finally surrendered to what he'd been fighting since that first day in the mercantile. He leaned forward, his lips finding hers in a kiss that felt like coming home after years in the wilderness. But the past is rarely content to stay buried. In early December, as Pine Creek prepared for Christmas, a stranger arrived in town. A hard-faced man with a badge from the Wyoming Territory and questions about a cowboy matching Reid's description. Looking for information about a ranch foreman murdered 2 years back, the lawman explained to the bartender, unaware that Reid was sitting at a corner table. Suspect was a young cowhand named Dawson. Reid Dawson. Reid froze, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. The murder accusation was a lie. He'd left that Wyoming ranch after a dispute with the foreman, a brutal man who'd beaten a young stable boy nearly to death. Reid had intervened, and there had been a fight, but the foreman had been very much alive when Reid rode away. The lawman continued. Suspects described as about 25, dark hair, blue eyes. Been tracking him through 3 territories. Reid slipped out the back door of the saloon, mind racing. He couldn't bring this trouble to Violet's door. Whatever vendetta the foreman had fabricated, it would only endanger her if he stayed. By nightfall, he had made his decision. He packed his few possessions, saddled Penny, and left a note on Violet's kitchen table, a coward's goodbye that explained nothing and everything. "Violet, a man from my past has come looking. What he claims isn't true, but it doesn't matter. I won't bring danger to your door. You deserve better than a life on the run with a man accused of murder. Forgive me." Reid, he rode out under cover of darkness, the December cold biting through his coat, matching the chill in his heart. The one time he dared to dream of something permanent, the past had found him anyway. Better to face it alone, away from Pine Creek, away from her. 3 days later, Reid made camp in a sheltered canyon 50 miles north. The weather had turned vicious, snow falling steadily since dawn. As he huddled by a meager fire, hoofbeats approached. Impossible in this storm, yet undeniable. His hand moved to his gun, but the rider who appeared through the swirling snow made him forget all caution. "Violet." She dismounted stiffly, her face red from cold beneath the heavy scarf wrapped around her head. Without a word, she strode to where Reid stood dumbfounded and slapped him hard across the face. "That," she said through chattering teeth, "is for leaving like a thief in the night." "How did you find me?" he managed. "Tommy tracked you. The boy has Shoshone blood and can read sign better than most adults." She rubbed her gloved hands together. Are you going to invite me to share your pathetic fire? Or shall we both freeze to death while discussing your poor decision-making? Still stunned, Reid helped her unsaddle her horse and added more wood to the fire. When they were finally settled beneath his blankets, her shivering gradually subsiding, he found his voice again. Violet, you can't be here. The Wyoming lawman, Marshall Phillips, she interrupted. He left yesterday, after learning the truth. Reid stared at her. What truth? That the foreman you supposedly murdered showed up drunk in Cheyenne 6 months ago and got himself killed in a card game. The real Marshall Phillips arrived in Pine Creek the day after the imposter, looking for the man impersonating him across 3 territories. Relief and confusion warred in Reid's mind. Then who was the first man? The foreman's brother, it seems, carrying a grudge and a stolen badge. She fixed him with a stern look. All of which you would have known if you'd stayed long enough to hear the truth instead of running at the first sign of trouble. Shame washed over Reid. I thought I was protecting you. By breaking my heart. Anger and hurt mingled in her voice. You didn't even give me a choice, Reid. You just decided for both of us. I'm sorry, he said, the words inadequate against the pain he'd caused. I've spent so long believing that leaving was the only way to stay safe. I couldn't see another path. And now, she asked, her eyes searching his face in the firelight. Reid took a deep breath. Now I see that running doesn't solve anything. It just postpones the reckoning. He reached for her hand. Violet, I want to go back. To Pine Creek. To you. If you'll have me. She studied him for a long moment. How do I know you won't run the next time something frightens you? It was a fair question, one Reid had asked himself repeatedly during his 3 days alone. Because I've tried living without you, and it's not living at all. It's just existing. He squeezed her hand. I love you, Violet. I think I have since that first day in the mercantile. Her expression softened, but doubt still lingered. Love isn't always enough, Reid. Then let me prove it isn't just words. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a ring fashioned from a silver dollar, crudely made but unmistakable in its purpose. I made this the night before the lawman came. Was going to ask you at Christmas. Violet stared at the makeshift ring, her eyes filling with tears. I'm asking you now, Reid continued, his voice rough with emotion. Not because we're stranded in a blizzard, but because I've finally learned what matters. Not running from pain, but running toward joy. Not avoiding loss, but embracing what's precious, however long it lasts. He held the ring between them. Violet James, will you marry me? Build a life with me in Pine Creek. Have a family with me? Grow old with me. She took the ring with trembling fingers. And if I say yes, you'll never run again? If you say yes, I'll spend the rest of my life coming home to you. Through her tears, Violet smiled. Then yes, Reid Dawson. Yes to all of it. As the blizzard raged outside, they sealed their promise with a kiss that held all the warmth of the future they would build together. Spring came early to Montana that year. The April morning dawned clear and mild as Pine Creek gathered to witness the wedding of Reid Dawson and Violet James. The small church overflowed with townspeople and ranchers from miles around, all come to see the union of the mercantile owner and the once drifting cowboy who had become indispensable to the community. Reid stood at the altar, hardly recognizing himself in the new suit Violet had insisted on ordering from Helena. At 26, he felt both older than his years and somehow reborn, as if his life were truly beginning today. When the church doors opened and Violet appeared, Reid forgot to breathe. She wore her mother's wedding dress, ivory lace over satin that caught the sunlight streaming through the windows. Her honey-blonde hair was crowned with wildflowers, and her sage-green eyes shone with joy as she walked slowly toward him. Halfway down the aisle, she paused, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her radiant face. Though the church was filled with people, in that moment, it felt as though they were alone. Reid saw the shadow of doubt in her eyes, the brief vulnerability that she rarely showed to others. I'm not beautiful enough for this, she whispered, so softly that only he could hear as she took the final steps to join him. For all these eyes. For you. Reid took her hands in his, oblivious to the waiting minister, to the murmuring congregation, to anything but the woman before him. Violet James, he said, his voice carrying in the hushed church. You're all I've been searching for, even when I didn't know I was looking. Your beauty isn't just in your face or form, though both take my breath away. It's in your courage, your kindness, your stubborn refusal to let me outrun my own heart." Tears glistened in her eyes, but her smile grew steady. "I spent 7 years wandering," Reid continued, "looking for something I couldn't name. Peace, perhaps. Purpose. A place that felt like home." He squeezed her hands gently. "I found them all in you." As they exchanged their vows before God and their community, Reid felt the final walls around his heart dissolve. The fear of loss that had driven him for so long was still there, but transformed, not a reason to run, but a reminder to cherish each day, each moment, each smile. Later, as they danced beneath lanterns strung across the town square, Violet looked up at her husband. "Are you happy?" she asked. Reid pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of wildflowers in her hair. "More than I ever believed possible." He glanced around at the celebrating townspeople, at the place that had become his home. "Though I'm still getting used to staying in one place." Violet laughed, the sound more beautiful to Reid than any music. "We don't have to stay forever, you know. We could see some of those places you've told me about. Denver, San Francisco. Maybe someday," Reid agreed. "But right now, everything I want is right here." As the stars appeared above Pine Creek, Reid and Violet slipped away from the celebration to the small house they now shared. Her grandfather's cabin, expanded and renovated by Reid's hands over the winter months. On the porch, they paused to look at the distant mountains, silver in the moonlight. "Thank you," Reid said quietly, "for finding me in that canyon, for bringing me home." Violet leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Thank you for being brave enough to stay." Inside their home, a fire welcomed them, the start of countless evenings they would share through the years to come. As Reid closed the door on the wilderness beyond, he realized that the greatest journey of his life was just beginning. Not one measured in miles across empty country, but in moments shared with the woman who had taught him that love wasn't weakness but the greatest strength of all.